They provided for the physical needs of the church, and we mentioned some of this stuff before with the role of the deacons and that type of thing, providing for the filling needs. Let me just make a couple comments on this. Chapter 2, verse 45, selling their possessions and goods, they gave to anyone as he had needs. So they sold their possessions and goods and gave to anyone as he had need. And then chapter 4, verse 32 to 37, all the believers were one in heart and mind. No one claimed that any of his possessions was his own, but they shared everything they had. With great power, the apostles continued to testify to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus. There were no needy persons among them. They shared things and had things in common. Some people have taken this passage in the book of Acts and tried to use it as a basis for socialism or communism or something like that. Communism is, of course, a bad phrase, but we do socialism. This are probably now to sanctify it a little more, we talk about the community, the responsibility to the community, and always a community focus and things. And indeed, the early church was community focused and things, but notice, question, what is the difference between this and what I have a problem is then people using these materials in Acts to support a political system today. And I think you've got to be really careful about taking scriptures from back then and trying to endorse some sort of political framework today. Socialism and communism. Here it says what? The people gave and came and gave to others who had need. By the way, was that the government forcing them to do that? Was the government mandating that to happen? No. Each individual had a choice to make. It was their stuff, and they could choose to give it or not to give it. Okay? And so you've got to be really careful about switching, saying, well, then everybody should give, and we will, demand that they do that and stuff. You're taking choice away from the people's freedom away. And by the way, God himself doesn't take freedom away. God himself allows people to choose. You can choose Christ or you can reject Christ. The choice is yours. And so you've got to be really careful with this stuff. And so be careful when somebody starts mapping these kind of verses over into socialism and communism. We know in most of the situations in communism, almost all that I know of, when communism comes in, they spread the goods around, and then what happens? Everybody becomes poor, and then basically millions of people die. Millions of people die. Under Stalin in Russia, over 20 million people. In Mao in China was 80 million people. Hitler, everybody says, oh, Hitler was so bad and stuff. Mao makes Hitler look like a 7-year-old. Okay, Mao killed over 80 million people in China, and so where is the you go to Cuba. You want communism? Go down to Cuba. Why are people trying to swim to America? Okay, same type of thing. You go into Yugoslavia. You go into Venezuela, and now they've embraced socialism, communism under Hugo Chavez. And when you go to the grocery store, what happens? Those grocery stores are bare now. The people are having trouble with food. North Korea, tell me about communism. The people are starving there. They've just lowered the height limit to get into the army because the people have been starved in North Korea so long. Now you only have to be 4'9" to get in the army. They actually had to lower the height thing so that they could, because their people are becoming shorter because there's so much lack of food and in North Korea. So people need to think about this stuff before you go taking the Bible and trying to jump into a liberation theology, which is what a lot of these people support. There's a real connection between communism and liberation theology. And what they do is they try to use religion to support these very evil frameworks. And religion becomes the handmaid of the politicians. And at that point, you got real trouble. And that's basically what's happened there. So anyways, be careful with that stuff. Now, what about Ananias and Sapphira? Ananias and Sapphira come in the early church and they said, hey, we sold all our goods, Acts chapter 5. We sold all our goods, and here it is, the apostles. This is all. The guy says, hey, is this everything you sold that you're giving? He says, yeah. Boom. The guy drops dead. He's killed dead. Ananias is killed dead. His wife comes in and he said, hey, did you give all this stuff to the poor and stuff like that? And boom. Sapphira's down, and God took both of them. Now, and by the way, the guy before, he says that, hey, while you had your goods, it was your privilege to do with it whatever you wanted. While you had the goods, it was your privilege to do with, you could make a choice to do whatever you wanted. But when you can't lie to God. You can't come and say, I'm giving all the poor, when you're lying, okay? But it was their choice to do that. And so what I'm saying is, be very careful. People start pulling choices away from people and saying and insinuating, you've got to do this and stuff. This is an obligation and things that you must do. You better put up a bunch of red flags and stuff. In Christianity, it's with open hands as a gift, as a free choice of an individual from a heart that is passionate for Jesus, desires to give and to help the poor. That's an individual choice. And by the way, what country in the world has given more to help around the world than any other country in the world? Okay? You've got people like Bill Gates doing billions of dollars into Africa, working with AIDS and solving some of the problems with AIDS over there. Also malaria, killing millions of people and hundreds of thousands of people dying from malaria, working on things to mitigate the blight of malaria and these famines and these plagues. Wonderful work people like Gates and others are doing to help the poor because they have wealth and they choose to give it. It's not government demanded. They choose to do it. And that philanthropy is a wonderful thing because it comes from a free heart that chooses to give. And what a model that is and things. So, okay, so these things, providing for the physical needs, the early church was involved in that, but be careful about some of those types of things. The unity, in the early church, these statements on unity, on chapter 2, verse 44 and things, and I don't want to spend a long time on this, but the church was all gathered together in one place, and they were together as one. Let me just read this. Chapter 2, verse 44. Chapter 2 is the chapter on the Pentecost, and it says in 2:44, all believers were together and had everything in common. Selling their possessions and goods, they gave to everyone as they had needs. Okay, and we had looked at that earlier. Okay, let's move on here to our next slide.